Okay, welcome everyone. My name is Jo Hyung-jin. I'm the managing partner at consulting firm called Kearney, Korea, and I'm happy to be here as part of this important discussion. I'll just do a quick introduction to the subject and to our panel, then they will just kick off and start. For quite some time, I do not remember actually any week passing by without watching news around the climate disaster or environmental pollutions and all those issues. And we all know this is not an issue for a specific industry or business. This is a humanitarian challenge. So now we actually bring all those industry leaders as well as policymakers to discuss how we can actually overcome and solve this problem together. So let me, please allow me to introduce some of our distinguished panel, starting from the governor of Jeju Island, Mr. Oh Young-hoon. And Mike Booth is a former executive vice president at Bill Gates Breakthrough Energy, and he led the White House Council for Environmental Quality for President Obama, please. Suban Watermelon is the CEO of RWE Offshore Wind. It is a leading player in offshore wind energy and with over 20 years of experiences. Gulsan Bashista is the regional investment lead for Asia at the Global Green Growth Institute. He spearheaded a number of investment related to the environmental issues, including Indonesia's first green energy project. And he's grounded here in Seoul, so he probably knows better. Okay. Share some of the latest innovation on clean energy in USA or elsewhere as well.
Sure. I will say, so I've spent the last almost 10 years working at an investment platform that Bill Gates started funding emerging technology intended to help solve and tackle the climate crisis. I want to just make one quick point about the scale of that challenge, and then I'm going to very quickly, given time, highlight 5 technologies that are getting a lot of attention in the US and around the world and from investors that I think we should all keep our eye on. The point on the scale that I just want to reiterate is, and the governor talked a little bit about it, this challenge touches all parts of our economy, right? I wish it was just the power sector and the electricity sector. The truth is, manufacturing, transportation, buildings, agriculture are actually collectively the largest source of emissions that we have around the world. And the good news is we've got a lot of solutions to tackle lots of those challenges. The bad news is that actually for some of the trickier things, like providing industrial heat for the processes we need to make steel and cement, or to figure out how to do zero emissions long-haul shipping, we just don't have those solutions yet. And in fact, almost half of the greenhouse gas emissions each year that we need to get down to zero are going to be tackled by technologies that we either don't yet have yet, they don't exist, they're either not at commercial scale, or they're just way too expensive for most countries in the world to afford to implement. So I had the luxury of sitting at kind of a front row seat watching investors and governments and others put money into a lot of these technologies. And I just want to quickly run through a few of them that I think are well positioned given 3 factors. That the technology has really leapfrogged in the last several years so that there is a high degree of efficacy on moving forward with them tackling this climate challenge. That capital and is flowing to them from private investors and public dollars, and that markets are being created around the world for them. And third, that policy and policymakers are generally supporting these technologies that I'm going to mention, even with some of the upheaval in politics that are happening around the globe. So real quickly, I would highlight 3 of them related to new sources of generation, and then 2 others. The generation sources that I would talk about First is advanced geothermal. So this is accessing super hot energy, 500-degree heat, from really deep below the Earth's surface, up to 3 miles. And there have been massive leaps forward in that technology using essentially fracking technology to do horizontal drilling to access these deep pockets of heat. Lots of capital is flowing into that. There are a few incredibly promising companies. And in places like the US and Europe and elsewhere, there are incentives, government-created incentives to help induce more of that discovery. The second generation technology I'd flag is nuclear fission. We've talked a lot about this at this conference. There's been a few panels on it. There's another one this afternoon. The change in where the nuclear fission market is today from where it was 5 or 10 years ago is amazing, and largely driven by the demand from AI and data centers. Some of the largest tech companies in the world are looking to nuclear as a key source of reliable, clean, firm power that they can rely on. It's still too expensive compared to lots of other technologies, but the investment from these hyperscalers is really starting to drive that down. And so Google, Microsoft, and others are leveraging, at least in the US, federal incentives to help drive that work as well. The third generation technology I'd mention is nuclear fusion, which has always been something that is like 30 years away. Everybody talks about it, but it's never quite there. I will say in the last 5 years, in the US and in Europe, and significantly in China, there's been a lot of work done with promising startups tackling fusion. And fusion is a nuclear technology that actually holds very few of the risks that nuclear fission holds. So there is not a waste and safety issue in the same way that there is for some fission reactors. And that has been super promising. But lots of money. A company called Commonwealth Fusion Systems has attracted billions of dollars of private capital. So those are 3 generation technologies. The fourth technology I'd mention is long duration energy storage. We talked a little bit about this yesterday at a panel. There's been a lot of development, including in places like Korea, for lithium ion batteries that have been a huge source of power for the electric vehicle market. But in so many other parts of industry, you need to be able to harness the wind and solar power when the sun is not shining and the wind is not blowing for way more than an hour or 2 that lithium-ion batteries can manage. So people are investing, and the technology has really moved forward on a whole variety of chemistries for long-duration energy storage that can be a day, several days, up to 100 hours. People are working on this. It is still too expensive. But I would watch this space because I think in the next few years there will be lots of developments that, paired with other technologies, will provide this source of storage that changes that equation quite a bit. The last technology I'd mention is just carbon management, which I think in light of the AI and data center demand is a huge source of growth, particularly in the US, but other markets as well. Carbon management is essentially carbon capture, use, storage, and some more advanced sides of those technologies, things like direct air capture, which is literally just sucking the carbon out of the air. Right now, those technologies are way too expensive to flourish in the market. But what's happening, particularly in the US, where oil and gas companies have been the primary proponents of that technology, they are essentially selling that technology to hyperscalers, Google, Microsoft, Meta, the rest, so that they can use natural gas to power their data centers, but capture that carbon and have a net zero impact on the environment. So that is a space that right now there are tons of startups, lots of support from governments around the world into that, and lots of capital flowing.
Thank you, Mike. I mean, we all aware of some of the technology you just mentioned, but we actually really didn't know it's how far ahead in terms of like development and all that. And it's really great to know and surprisingly great news. So let's move on to some of the specific technology, because Sven, as a global expert in offshore wind, would you just share your point of view in terms of bringing this technology for our to overcome all these disasters and all that. Yep.
Yes, very happy to do that, Joe. And yeah, talking about offshore wind, and indeed it is, in contrast to some of the things that Mike was talking about, it is a very mature and well-established technology. I know it's not the case yet in Korea, I'm going to come back to that, but it is a very mature and established technology in other parts of the world, especially in Europe. We have more than around 40 gigawatts of installed capacity of offshore wind, which is the equivalent of around 40 nuclear power stations. And very importantly, what I'd also like to leave you with as a key point here, not only is it a very mature and established technology and industry, it also provides, in comparison to all of the other renewable technologies, the most stable and highest number of full load hours in comparison with onshore wind, and in particular photovoltaic, which has a very, very fluctuating power output. The power output from offshore wind is more stable and has more full load hours. We're typically talking about load factors of 30 to 50% depending on where you are in the world. So that is a very, very stable source of energy, which also has very important impact on providing stability to the grid and providing, it's not baseload power in the strict sense of the word, but compared to all of the other renewable technologies, it's the closest to baseload power. So that is a very important aspect. There is also a second aspect that I would like to allude to. Like also the other renewable technologies, offshore wind is also a technology which provides energy security, and it supports energy independence. And in the current geopolitical climate, I think this topic, if anything, has been a little bit underrepresented in the debate. So not only does it provide clean and CO2-free energy, it also provides secure energy, because it is an indigenous resource, as all the other renewables resources are. And that makes it a very attractive technology to many countries in the world, not the least also here in Asia, for example, for Korea, for other countries as well in this region, and certainly also in my home country, in Germany, and other countries in Europe. So energy security and energy independence and clean energy, I think, goes hand in hand, and that is something that I think we as industry and business leaders should talk more about and make sure that we are aligned in that also with policymakers. The final point I would like to leave you with, however, offshore wind, the individual projects are very, very large and complex infrastructure projects. Individual projects are several billions of US dollars of investments, and they are large and complex infrastructure projects that require, like all other large infrastructure projects, require a lot of planning certainty for the investors, which includes things like permitting, grid connection, and also a long-term outlook on growth targets and political stability and stability of the regulatory framework. That is what we still need to work on in many parts, in many countries of the world. It does exist in some countries, and where it does, we have really seen that offshore wind can take a leading role in the energy transition, for example, in the United Kingdom, also in Germany, and in Denmark. In other countries, including Korea, I think the government is making the right steps. There has been the new Offshore Wind Act is being introduced, which I think is a very important step. And I know that the government is now working on implementing or introducing a central auction regime for offshore wind, which I think is exactly the right direction. And we as RWE, we are active here in project development, also in Korea, and we are actively engaged with the government to also talk about our international experience about what is required in that central auction system to really provide the incentives and the attractive boundary conditions for international investors and Korean investors to really invest into these big projects, which I am deeply convinced can and will play a very, very important role also for the future energy supply for Korea.
Thank you, Sven. Actually, energy security is one great topic that we should all keep in mind. And thank you for bringing that up. And as you probably not know, aware, Jeju Island is famous for three things: the female population, stone, and the wind. So Jeju might be the perfect place for the offshore wind discussion. Gulsan, Sven just mentioned this is like multi-billion-dollar kind of project. Every time we discuss the renewable energy, how can we best implement this clean tech in terms of investment and funding?
Thank you. I would talk of the risks. So I come from the investment cohort. I've been in investments all throughout my life. And I would say Sven kind of concluded his remarks and kind of segued into my discussion of project preparation and de-risking in many ways, right? When investors look at, and when GDGI is preparing these projects, particularly for the multilaterals, for the development agencies, for development finance, so on and so forth, the most important aspect really is the government's willingness. And that I think we've ticked the box. You know, if the governor just his presentation said that the willingness is out there, there are plans, there are timelines, it's very, very solid, right? Particularly in this scenario. A second big thing that investors would look at is regulatory preparations, right? The policy frameworks that are available, particularly on the new tech that was being discussed also by Mike in his speech. I think particularly a few technologies and few very interesting, rather complex payment mechanisms, which was presented during Governor's speech. I'll stress upon that a little bit. So GDGI is emphasizing a lot on the upcoming technologies, particularly the green hydrogen. So we have a program called Hydrogen to Green Growth, and we're really focusing on project preparation, right? What are the missing pieces, right? And that kind of project preparation links to all of these aspects of the political willingness, the regulatory and policy environment, de-risking the technology, right? There are 2 or 3 emerging technologies, and we need to really closely focus on how those technologies can be localized. I particularly am a big fan of, there could be a global technological shift, right? But it has to be brought into a particular country, and that has to be localized to the country's needs, to the needs of that country. That I think is a very crucial aspect of what we do with our member countries, and particularly when I'm part of designing these programs, that we bring in technological acumen and people like Sven, you know, who have that implementation knowledge in terms of development cycles are brought into at the right time. The third bit that I would really want to stress upon is the financial viability. You know, nothing moves the needle if it's not viable, if it's not bankable enough. And there comes the portion of blended finance. You know, a lot is done in my humble opinion in the beginning with research, with the grants, and initially with a lot of emphasis on proving the technology or the demonstration project, which was also mentioned. The 3 point that I think is a big indicator. When you pave the path, the first one is difficult, and then of course the big challenge is the scale. Right? How do we take it to the commercial scale? How do we really start to leverage the initial investments? So I think that bankability or proving the bankability is very, very crucial, and that's where organizations like GDGI are doing their bit in terms of proving the technology and proving the bankability of these programs. The last bit that I would mention, particularly on the financing mechanisms. Now, I would mention about the carbon markets. I think particularly, Article 6.2, which is country-to-country trades are doing their bit, but also Article 6.4, which is essentially the private sector participation in the carbon markets has not been as much as it should have been, particularly due to the lack of the right regulatory frameworks. But they are all coming together with PACM. UNFCCC is coming up with 6.4, Article 6.4 readiness, which is very crucial. And this I link to the private sector participation. When you look at what is carbon market participation, it is an added line in your financial model, right? Which is a revenue stream proving that this technology is working and that a viable trade can happen. I think it's really crucial that the voluntary carbon markets pick up for trades to happen to get the scale that we're looking for. I think it'll be only very, very important to mention the importance of AI in the mix of things, because particularly on the MRV front, I think AI has really enabled or is continuing to enable the technological shifts and movement, where we did a panel with ADB, for example, and they also mentioned that internally within their systems and externally in the AI systems that are getting developed, there's a lot of impetus on green tech enabled by the AI technologies, which of course we at GDGI also laying a lot of importance on. So I would not mention AI. I think it is a very, very important tool that investors are looking at de-risking some of their investments. But readiness, project preparation, technically strong programs, and financial viability, to me, remains at the helm of things when it comes to getting investments and investor attentions. Yeah.
Thank you. I mean, that's a great point. So we totally understand the private sector should be ready, and we should really leverage the latest technology, even AI and all that, to prepare the market. Mike, as I understand, you also worked for President Obama. There are things, because even the public and private sector need to do or even watch for or watch out when we all put together this effort for a clean energy. Is there any advice you'd like to make in terms of implementation?
Oh boy, there's lots of advice. I think what's challenging is the need, as the rest of the panel talked about, to get these technologies implemented and scaled in countries around the world. And the political systems and the policy structures are different around the world. So it is an incredibly complex and expensive process, as Sven mentioned, to go do that permitting and planning and all of that process country by country in these multinational firms that are trying to deploy this energy across the world. I would love for there to be greater cooperation across some of these governments to harmonize some of the standards, to ensure that they were de-risking these technologies in parallel, so that public money that's going from Europe or Asia or the United States towards these technologies are actually working in tandem to do that at a faster pace. And then, given the seat that I've been in, I hope that governments continue to look at all available technologies. Thank God for the progress that wind and solar have been able to make, where they've brought these costs down in the way that they have. We need that pattern to be repeated in so many other venues. And lots of governments have not yet sort of widened their aperture to look at the full suite of technologies, but doing that will help accelerate.
Shubhen, would you like to make any kind of wrap-up comment before?
Yeah, I would just very quickly build a little bit on what Mike has said with regards to international collaboration, and I think that's very important for many of the technologies, certainly for offshore wind. It's a very global industry in terms of the supply chain. There is no individual country that can do this entirely on its own. And I would also want to encourage governments, and I do that wherever I go. I encourage governments and say, please do speak to other governments, in particularly those where offshore wind is already more advanced, and learn from what they have done to make it really into a big business. Learn from their mistakes, do understand what didn't work, because most countries, even those where now it's a big industry, have gone through periods of mistakes or regulations that didn't work well. And let's learn from each other rather than every country basically going through that same experience curve again and again.
Thank you. So I totally understand. We actually need to make a change together. So, I mean, thank you for all those great insight and sharing your experiences. And this will probably wrap up the session. Thank you.